Welcome to the final class of today's Webtember conference. Man, it's been fun today. Mike Mansfield will now speak to us on the topic of diving into the newly released 1931 Canada Census. I had some fun with this week myself, and looking forward to learning more about it from Mike. Here's what Mike looks like. He works for MyHeritage as the Director of Content Operations, and I'll have Mike tell you a little bit more about himself as we turn it over to him. So, Mike, hi.
Hello, Jeff.
Glad to have you here. Here comes the screen for you.
I think I just got it.
Okay, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here with you. Really nothing else I'd rather do on a Friday in September, but speak about a wonderful topic that I really enjoy, and that is census records, and specifically today, the latest Canada Census. Just a brief introduction about myself, and here's a portrait. I have a computer science degree from Brigham Young University, as well as a Master's of Library and Information Science from Syracuse. I worked about 10 years at Ancestry, 5 years at Family Search, and this is my 10th year at MyHeritage. So you can say I'm trying to work for all of the major genealogy organizations and companies. MyHeritage, I'm the Director of Content Operations, and whenever I speak to people at conferences or at events, I always like to talk to them about where their family came from. I can't do that here with you, but mine come from Sweden, Denmark, Norway, England, Wales, colonial America, Canada. Specifically my paternal surname ancestor, my Mansfield, immigrated to Ontario in 1831 when he came over with a land grant from Surrey, England, and then a few family also from Germany, or what was Prussia at the time. All right, we're here today to talk about the 1931 Canada Census, and the outline that we'll dive into are, we'll look at the different form types, and then I'm going to jump right into an introductory example. And I think having seen the records initially will give you some context for some of the discussion that will follow, which includes a short segment on the historical context of the 1931 census, the organization of the census and how we can use that both to help us understand what we're seeing and also to be able to search for some other use cases that we may need to consider. Specifically, we'll look at the census districts and sub-districts. We'll look at the timeline and some of the history of the release of the 1931 census, now available to us this summer. Some statistics that I find very fascinating. And along the way, I always like to share some tips and strategies on how to have success. And as I work with these records on a regular daily basis, I find things that I find helpful, and I like to pass those on. All right, with no further ado, the forms that we'll see are on primarily what's called Form 1A and Form 1B. And I have the percentages there. Now, if we add up these two numbers, you see that we only get to 99. So the last 1% are an additional type of population schedule that was specifically developed for the Northwest Territories, and then also used for certain parts of the Yukon and other predominantly indigenous areas, I believe, of Ontario. They're in sort of around the Hudson Bay. And that's Form 1 NWT. Again, it's a little weird because it looks like they did decide to use these for a few locations outside of the Northwest Territories, but these are rather rare, again, representing only 1% of all of the forms. The geography in 1931, it's pretty much as we know it today, obviously with the exception that the newmost territory, or the newest territory of Nunavut, is not present. That was established in the last, 20, 30 years. Special note about Newfoundland. So Newfoundland didn't join the Canadian Confederation until 1949. And so Newfoundland and Labrador are not included in the 1931 census. There are other censuses that were conducted in Newfoundland and Labrador. I thought about trying to include a little more comprehensive view of all the Canadian censuses and what was conducted when. I decided that if I did that, I would fail at both my topic here of addressing deeply the 1931 and trying to give an overview of other censuses. Canada does have a rich and incredible history with census collection, especially prior to 1850, 1851 or so. There's lots of smaller specific censuses, and then some complexity as well with some of the provinces out in the West as they started to be developed, and other cases here like Newfoundland. So probably watch for a webinar that I may put together next year here with Legacy, where we might do a more comprehensive view of Canadian censuses. All right, so we're going to dive into this example. We have this Ole Jorgensen, born in 1873 in Norway. And at the bottom, I'm showing you what we call our individual, sort of our record view looks like. But we're going to jump over to a browser. And here I'm showing the MyHeritage website. I'm logged in with my account, and I can find this collection just by coming to the research menu bar and dropping down to the collection catalog. I can type just anything I want here. I can just say 1931 census. I'll get other things here like the France census 1931. So this is the one we want, 1931. 10.4 million records. This is a little bit higher than the official published count, which is somewhere in the 10.3 number. I've looked, and as far as I can tell, we didn't knowingly key or make index records of any duplicative forms. But if a duplicative form was out of sequence, then we might have inadvertently keyed some additional records. But hey, if your ancestor shows up twice because we have a tiny bit of duplication, I always think that's a good thing personally. But yeah, just know that these counts are often not exactly what the government publishes. And as I'm showing here, our count is a little higher than the official count as well. All right, so let's look for this individual, Ole Jorgensen. I think I can type just this and he'll come right up. Yeah, so here he is, Ole Jorgensen. So here's sort of this card view. Again, here with the website of MyHeritage, I can flip over to sort of a different columnar view. It's a fairly new feature if you haven't seen that. And then let's go ahead and look at the record. So see, we have the name of the individual, his gender, his birth year. So in the 1931 census, we only have age. So age, he's listed as 58. So when we write circa here, this means that we've computed an approximate birth year, right? We're just taking 58 and subtracting it from 1931. So he could be born in 1872 as well, depending on when his birthday might have happened. We also have in the index for 1931 the religion. This is a field we often don't key, but we decided to include it here. Marital status, the residence, this township of Springfield. This, when I looked it up, looks like it's a sort of suburban township area just to the east of Manitoba. Excuse me, of Winnipeg, very near Winnipeg. I'm almost certain an easy commuting distance. Another thing I like about this record, it shows us that he naturalized or became a naturalized Canadian citizen in the year 1900. He's declaring his nationality as Canadian. We get information about his father and mother's birthplace, his wife. Unfortunately, we're going to be getting wives' married names here, not their maiden name, and then the names of a number of children. And then down here in this section, we have a number of fields that are sort of metadata, page number, line number, the dwelling number, etc. And then we get to the image itself. I can look at it here, I can zoom around, but I also often like to click into the image and get this view where I can get the household on the left and the record on the right. I can also collapse that to see just the names, or I can just collapse the whole thing and I can bring it back if I want with this control. So this individual was here at the bottom, line 41, and his name is Ole Jorgensen. And I'm going to flip back to my deck and we'll dissect this record deeply with also looking at the header at the same time. And that will give us a better sort of way to look at this record. It's kind of hard to zoom around in a presentation like this. So that's why I built these next slides. So here's the image that I just showed you of Ole Jorgensen and his family of a spouse and 8 or 9 children. I haven't counted how many children. And what we're going to do is we're going to dissect this. And so up here at the top, we get this header, and this is Form 1B. Form 1B was generally used for more rural areas of the country, and 1A is more of the urban or city areas. Although that doesn't always perfectly hold true. You'll certainly run into some, say, fairly densely populated towns where maybe they're using Form 1B or 1A and vice versa. And I'll show you the differences between the two in just a moment. So here at the top, we get information about the province, the electoral district, and the municipality. They're sort of in the upper center right. The information about the enumerator. We didn't include the name of the enumerator, and rarely do in a census like this, and the page number. Then we get a header that gives us information about the fields in both French and English. Then we get the body of the schedule, which is 50 individuals for both forms 1A and B. And at the bottom, and I think there's some good things to recognize down here, and I'll include this as we go forward in just the next few minutes, are some abbreviations that the census enumerators were asked to use. They always don't follow exactly the instructions, but generally they're doing or did okay. And I'll show you some of those. All right, so we're going to be looking at this part. If you're okay, I'm just going to be cutting out the English portion of the field descriptions. And then we'll look at this family. I will also include, we're actually going to do this in 2 segments. We're first going to look at the left side of the page and the family below. I'll include the line numbers and the footer portion where we get these abbreviation tables along with it. And then we'll do the same thing for the left side. So just so you get aware, just so that you are aware, the next 2 slides will be sort of a photoshopping, if you will, of these different components, both the left side and a right side. All right, so the left side of Form 1B, if we zoom in a little bit, I've put in here the column numbers, and then here are rows 41 through 50. And so here we see this individual. So we get a dwelling or house number, a family, household, or institution. I'll talk a little bit more about those a little bit later when I'm talking about the work we did to reconstitute these family households. We get the name of the individual for every person that's enumerated. It depends. Sometimes the enumerator will use a ditto indicator, ditto or copy down indicator, as he or she did here, indicating that all the people 41 through 49 have the surname Jorgensen. Place of abode. So here on Form 1A, they're asking about section numbers, township numbers, range numbers, and meridians. This is maybe a good point just to quickly mention that censuses are frustrating when we look at low-level jurisdictions. Generally, they do a really nice job, like in Canada or the US, of being well structured at, say, the provincial or state level. And then they do fairly well going to a level below that, say, to a county or some other lower jurisdictions. But when you get into cities and villages, that wasn't really the intent of the way the government was trying to collect the information. And so the towns and villages that are often listed in places can be very unstandardized, very inconsistent. And so here in the 1931 Canada Census, we chose to focus our presentation of residence places off of the very top part of the header in the municipality, the district, and the province. I just wanted to point that out, especially when you see the difference here in this section for question 4. When I show the difference for Form 1A, you'll see that there'll be some additional information that you might find useful there. And then also at the bottom, here's where we get information about some of these abbreviations that they use. For example, in field 5, was the home owned or rented? At the bottom, we see that if they indicated owned, then they were to write the letter O. Other information you can see here, one interesting thing about this census, just like they did in the United States in 1930, is they had this interesting question 10, does this family have a radio? That kind of makes sense. It would almost be like in a modern census here in U.S. or Canada. They might ask, does the household have an internet connection or an internet service provider? Be a very similar sort of way of understanding how they might be able to get information. Additional fields here is that we normally see, such as relationship to head, the gender, their marital status, their age at the last birthday. And then we get the place of birth in 15 for the person themselves, as well as for his or her parents, both the father and the mother. All right, then if we look at the right side of the same form, we get questions 18 through 40. And if I put in, again, the same records corresponding to the same gentleman from Norway, but his family was born, his children were all born in Ontario, and I think he married a woman from Ontario. But it shows us his year of immigration. I'm sorry, I misspoke here. The wife is from France. So Bertha is from France, and her father is Belgian, and her mother is Belgian. I'm getting ahead of myself. So here at the top two rows of the main schedule here, we see a year of immigration for both the husband and wife, and the year of naturalization for the man. I haven't looked at Canadian naturalization rules for a while. I'd need to go remind myself, but it may be that she didn't need to be have her own naturalization if she was married to a man that was naturalized. So that may be what they're indicating with that mark in the year of naturalization, is didn't really have a year because she maybe didn't need one, so to speak. All right, so we get their nationality. Everyone here is listed as Canada, and then their racial origin. So Norwegian, Belgian, and then the children here all being born in Canada, but they're claiming racial origin of Norwegian, which I find interesting. Information about what languages they can speak, both French and or English. Information about the religion, Church of England, and as I indicated, this is a field that we did decide to transcribe and include in our index. So this might be helpful if you're looking for specific families and you have maybe a really common surname, and perhaps knowing their religion will help you segment the results better. 26 and 27 were information about reading and writing and how many months at school they were, and then occupation, industry. The rest of the fields here, 28 through 40, these are not in the index that we created. And so this is an example where you definitely want to come and look at the associated image with records you're examining to see what additional clues here you can find, such as their occupation, which industry they're in, number of weeks that they were working. I think question 34. We'll talk about the impact of the Great Depression, particularly on the census, in just a moment. And so the government, in some of these questions, 32 through 40, we're looking for information about people's employment status. So here's a comparison of the differences between Form 1A and 1B, and the differences are all in question 4. In Form 1B at the top, you see that it's broken out into 4, 4A, 4B, and 4C. And then the bottom is just question 4, which is more of a kind of a free form field where they could write in all sorts of things. In a large city, we might see the name of a street, the name of an apartment. The enumerators necessarily didn't follow instructions too well on what they wrote in that, which is unfortunate. So yeah, so the differences are here in field 4 and 4A, B, and C. And then I mentioned 1% of the schedules are what's called Form 1 NWT for Northwest Territories. Here's an example of this place, Aklavik. I had to look this place up. It's a small village. I think today there's about 600 people that live here, and it's near the delta of the Mackenzie River, way up there in the northern reaches of the Northwest Territories. This form seemed to have specific focus on collecting information about First Nations, Indigenous peoples specifically, but that doesn't mean that it's exclusively Indigenous peoples. For example, here at the top, we have 2 households where the racial or tribal origin is indicated as Indian. And then we get 3 households here at the bottom, or at least 2.5 households, for that last household may continue onto the next page, that are indicated as Eskimo. And then sandwiched in between them, we get 3 gentlemen from Denmark who are there working as a trapper, as we see over in field 16. All right, let's shift and talk about some historical context. And it's impossible to talk about the 1931 Canada Census without a few comments about the Great Depression in Canada. A few countries were affected as severely as Canada. There's some reasons that I've studied and was reading about this, that economists and people that research this much more than I have seem to point as the main cause. But one issue was heavy economic dependence on raw materials and farm exports, a worldwide drop in commodity prices, again related to the dependence on raw materials and farm commodities, or crops, a global trade war and high tariffs. Most industrialized countries, the U.S., Canada, countries in Europe, were engaged in this trade war and had high tariffs on all sorts of products across the board. A swift decline in economic demand and credit, and a crippling drought in the prairies, specifically referring to Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan, as well as into Ontario. And millions of Canadians were left unemployed, hungry, and often homeless. In Canada, the changes after the 1929 financial panic into the 1930s was dramatic. Between 1929 and 1933, 1933 is often considered to be the deepest, hardest, most severely bad year of the Depression, not only in Canada, but also in the United States. But by 1933, the country's gross national expenditure had fallen by 42%. And that's an overall measure of public and private spending. By 1933, 30% of the labor force was out of work. 1 in 5 Canadians became dependent upon government relief for survival. The Great Depression also had uneven impacts. The 4 western provinces, referring to British Columbia, Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan, were economically dependent on primary product exports, sort of as I mentioned a few moments ago. Years of drought in the prairies, along with plagues of grasshoppers and hailstorms, caused large crop failures. Obviously, here in the United States, where I've lived and grew up, I learned a lot about the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma and Texas, and until I had a chance to research this, I didn't fully comprehend the impacts also of the Dust Bowl there in the prairie provinces, which looked to be just as severe, or maybe even more so than what they were experiencing in Oklahoma. In Saskatchewan, the province's income plummeted by 90% in 2 years. Saskatchewan was tremendously hard hit, more so than probably any other area during the Depression. It also had uneven impacts. Ontario and Quebec experienced heavy unemployment, but were overall less affected because of their more diversified economies. As both of these provinces produced finished goods and services further protected, again, the protections provided by the tariffs for the domestic market. And when I wrote this slide, I had a mixed feeling about this, and I'm saying, oh, here's the good news. The Maritimes had already entered into such a bad decade or two of economic decline that they had less distance to fall. That's a really sort of sad statement now that you think about it, that they were already in a slump when the Depression hit. There were also uneven burdens. The burden of the Depression was unequally distributed. Wages dropped throughout the 1930s, but prices declined even faster, which meant that if you had a job or were a property owner, that generally your standard of living might have gone up during the Depression. But farmers, young people, small business owners, and especially the unemployed bore the brunt of the economic hardship. I think this is my last slide, then we'll move on to some factors we'll consider about this historical impact. But the impact on population was also profound. The number of immigrants accepted into Canada dropped tremendously. I think that's almost 86% drop just in 6 years. Birth rates plummeted from 13.1 live births per thousand to 9.7 by 1937. And 50 years of urbanization, in other words, generally the population migrating to cities and more urban areas, was reversed with the exception of Saskatchewan. Basically, many people in cities referred to go back to the land as a preferable option to remaining in a city and just existing on government relief. Also, a noticeable rise in what was referred to as Canadian nativism. And here's a good quote. Now, this is by Wilston, W.B. Wilston. The public rightly ask that you remove from this place the Russian and other European people who have only been in this country for a short time, and particularly the men of this class who are sending all their earnings back to Europe should not be allowed to have the work on the power and RR construction while hundreds of Canadians are standing in the breadline. I assume what they mean by power and RR, the power probably being the power grid infrastructure, and RR is probably the railroad, would be my guess. So again, this notion that unemployment is so challenging that we're also having a lot of migrant labor in the country, and people had concerns about that. All right, so what are the factors that we need to consider about the 1931 census, understanding the huge impact of the Great Depression? All right, so the census started on June 1st, 1931. Now, when I lived in Canada for 2 years in the late 1980s and early 1990s, May seemed like winter to me still. So by the time you got to June, it felt like, okay, spring is really kind of here now, and it's starting to get warm consistently. And so keep that in mind, that June 1st, a lot of people are probably moving to maybe an opportunity to work on a farm, other opportunities that a summer work might provide. So think about the population being in a different degree of flux than they might have been had the census been conducted, say, in December or January or something. From June 1st, enumeration continued daily except Sundays until the enumerator finished their assignment. There's certainly almost no way that most of these enumerators finished their work within one day. Many of them would have probably taken the better part of a week, perhaps longer, to canvass their assigned what's called a sub-district, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Be mindful of people moving around, like I mentioned. Anticipate increased multi-generational households, and I think I have some examples of these coming up. Anticipate more men and young adults being away from the primary household. Anticipate non-family members boarding or lodging with a primary household, as they're also looking for different work opportunities. Okay, the organization of the 1931 census are based loosely, or more than loosely, actually, almost specifically on these electoral districts that had been established and used for voting. And so basically the electoral districts inform the census districts, and the census districts inform the development of the electoral districts. It's a little bit of a chicken and the egg type of dilemma, and the answer to this dilemma is, well, they evolved together, right? They kind of grew up at the same time over many, many decades. And so I want to show you some tools or how we can find some information about these districts. So the census is broken nicely into provinces and territories. Again, keep in mind that Newfoundland and Labrador are not included. And then the provinces and territories are all divided into districts, and then districts are divided into sub-districts. So one of the places that I lived in Quebec was a city called St. Bruno. And so I looked up the location on this map, and I'll show you how to find these maps in just a moment. So there's this two sources I'm going to point you to, and near the end of my presentation, I have these same URLs on a slide that I'll leave on the web. I'll leave up on the screen, and you can copy those down or take a screenshot. And then 1931 census maps, another resource. I think that one takes you to a page at Library and Archives Canada. In fact, we'll look at that in just a few moments. Yeah, so going on, here is the example I was going to show you, where we can look at this district within Quebec. And here is a subdistrict, the subdistrict of St. Bruno. And then if I zoom in, I can see more information about the city and its boundaries. Another nice thing about these maps is they give me a way to navigate or find what other maps are relative to this map. So if I'm too far to the north here, I can go to these other maps and I can find those fairly efficiently. Let me see if I can pull this up real quickly. I apologize. I realized that I'd lost a link here. Give me 1 second. As I get the link, and we'll go here. Alrighty, so here's a resource that I wanted to show that lets me see these maps. So for example, I was looking for this district in Quebec, and I can come down here and I can look at the district name as well as the as other information, that's district number. And for example, I can click on any one of these and immediately will bring up a map for Dorchester. And so it's here in bold, these are references to the other maps that are neighbors to this one and how I can find those. So understanding these sub-districts and districts can also be helpful to us, as we sometimes might need to search all of the records in a sub-district. We might need to maybe set the index aside and go page by page, and I'll show you how to do that as well here in just a moment. In the materials that are presented that we receive from Library and Archives Canada, they have these wonderful title boards. And I'll show you how you find these on the website as well when you're looking at the index. But we get the name of the province, the district number, the district name, the sub-district number, and very often some sort of sub-district name and a description. I don't think this is, in this case, this is the name of the sub-district, St. Bruno Parish. Some of these will have a more extended description as well, and it tells us that there's pages 1 through 22. So I come back to our website. Let me just start a new search here. We'll come back to the 1931 census. And again, I can type Canada, 1931 Canada, that's going to give me the same hit. And so, for example, we can search for another individual here, Alexander Lacoste, and his residence is St. Bruno, and he's in this district called Chamblay-Verchères, I believe. Yeah, so here we have an individual, Andre Lacoste, and if I click on his record again, down here in the image view, you see that we have this control here. And so at the very first page for every sub-district, every record you come to, and if you look at that control and go to the first image, you should land on the title, this title board for this sub-district. So that's just one way that you can go and see those. Generally, these were actually transcribed by Library and Archives Canada and came to us as metadata from Library and Archives Canada, which we then folded into the index. One feature, I can use this back arrow to go back to the image that I came on. And so this does now open up some additional searching capabilities where I can say, okay, I want to search for anyone by this name in this specific sub-district. And so let me change a setting here. I'm going to say place must match and hit apply. So now in this sub-district, again, this is a very tight geographic area again, we see that there's 13 individuals enumerated with that surname. So this is a very effective way to narrow your results down. As you're looking for surnames, perhaps think about how to use those sub-districts. A very powerful kind of way to search. You can also just, I think, remove the last name entirely and hit search, and the sub-district has almost 1,100 individuals, and you could look at every person in the index for that one sub-district. Moving forward, let's talk about the release of the 1931 census and how we got to where we are today. So the original paper census returns were microfilmed in the 1950s by the Dominion Bureau of Statistics. And as is very common, not only in Canada, but around the world, after the microfilm was created, the original paper returns were destroyed. So I think by about 1970 or 71, Statistics Canada had been organized, and this Dominion Bureau of Statistics had been folded into Statistics Canada. But thankfully, in the year about 2005 to 2006, they made a new master microfilm copy. Acetate microfilms that these originally were stored on have this interesting problem where acetate or acetic acid is the same acid that gives vinegar its sort of acidic smell and flavor. And so acetate microfilms, if you under certain conditions, can start to essentially produce acetic acid. And I've been at some institutions where you open up a can of microfilm and it smells like a jar of pickles. And so thankfully, the Canadian archivists realized that this was a risk, and maybe they had indication this was starting to happen. And so they did make a new master microfilm copy. That copy was held by Statistics Canada until January of this year, when the microfilm was transferred to Library and Archives Canada. There were 187 rolls of microfilm, and Library and Archives Canada digitized the microfilm between when they received it there in January and June 1st. So that's just about 104 days ago, something like that, is when the images were published or were available for partners such as ourselves to download. There are just over 230,000 digital images. So on June 1st, we downloaded the images from Library and Archives Canada. The next 2 to 3 days, we spent building what we call the King specification and preparing the images for King. The images actually came to us as a number of very large compressed zip files. Some of these zip files took hours to decompress just on their own. And then on June 5th, we started the indexing. June 6th, the next day, some of the first what we call index returns. These are batches of index records that are coming out of our indexing operations group. And then on August 20th, the index was completed. So about 80 days to create the index, averaging 130 records per day. And then we spent about the next 20 days completing data processing, data normalization, and loading the content into the publication systems. And then September 10th, earlier this week, the index was released on MyHeritage. So again, just one of the hallmarks of my career has been being able to work on projects like this. When I retire, it'll be days like September 10th, releasing of this important census that I'll always remember fondly. But I do have a bit of a mea culpa. As I was preparing for this talk a few days ago, I discovered that an inordinate number of records in our initial release were incorrectly associated as being residences of these two specific locations. This is due to a metadata merging error. We can recover from this very easily, and I hope to have this fixed by next week. So I apologize. There's a little blemish on my record. This was my error and my error alone. I just wanted to make you aware that if you see a lot of people from these specific subdistricts in Ontario, please ignore it for just a few days. Go look at the document, and we'll get these fixed as soon as we can. I want to talk a little bit about data normalization and what goes into some of this sausage making that I referred to. What did we do for the last 20 days as we were preparing? So one thing that I always like to use as an example is consider the relation to head, or what's the relationship to the head of the family. So you and I could probably sit down and think, yeah, maybe we'd get a couple hundred unique values here, sister, grandmother, niece, cousin, cousin-in-law, great-grandfather, grandnephew, whatever. But we get an index back like this, and we'll have tens of thousands of unique values. In this case, we had over 16,000 unique values of relationship to head. And so normalization is this work we do, and all organizations in our field do this. It's the work we do to interpret the many variant or wrong forms and spellings to make a corrected version of that field or of that data. For example, wife, here are a few of the dozens of different ways that wife appeared in the index. And because this is Canada, we also get the same thing in French for the French word for wife. And so normalization is looking at all these 16,000 different unique values. And when we were done, we were just over 300 standardized or normalized relationship to head fields or values. Household reconstruction is also particularly challenging. Very often, a census will present a construct like this in the 1931 census, where they're giving us a household kind of start and stop indicator with a number. And this is very clean, and this looks really promising. And if we look at this household, a very sort of standard atomic household with a head, a wife, 2 daughters, and 2 sons. But then going down further, you see we have a head, a son, a daughter-in-law. So that daughter-in-law is probably the wife of the son. And then we get 2 granddaughters who are probably the children of the son and the daughter-in-law. So this is an example of a multi-generational household that I mentioned a little while ago. Another interesting example here, where we have a head, 53-year-old man whose mother is living with him, and so mother is there at the bottom. And so we also get inconsistencies based on who the head is, right? So some of the children here are granddaughter of the mother, but they're also the daughter or son of the head. And so also different ways that we get tripped up. But this census was particularly challenging in that they seemed to not like the way that the enumerators were recording these household numbers, and they like to scratch them out and write corrections and then scratch out the corrections and write new versions. Basically what I'm trying to say is we pretty much had to abandon our hope that we could use those with any degree of reliability. And instead we had to use other techniques to dissect these family groups based on surnames, relationship to head, and other fields that we had present. Let's look at the top 50 most common surnames. So here are the top 10, Smith through Taylor. The next 10 are 11 through 20, 21 through 30, 31 through 40, and 41 through 50. And to me, whenever I'm doing research, I do like to consider what's the popularity of the surname that I'm searching. Is it going to be something like Smith or Stewart or Jackson, where I'm going to expect to see a huge number of names? And this helps inform my search strategy, that I need to think about other ways of finding the right family by using combinations of individuals, right? I'm searching with the name of a person, but also at the same time the name of his spouse or the name of 1 or 2 of his children, to try to winnow some of these really large and popular surnames down to more manageable results. Let's look at the 50 least common surnames. Well, we have a tie. In fact, we have a massive tie. There are over 200,000 surnames that occur once and only once. And here are 5 just from surnames that start with the letters P-A-S. So here's a Pascuala, a Pasalis, a Pasanto, a Pazingal, and a Pastoback. And so this number of 200,000 is probably underrepresentative, because if we have a family, say a family of 5 that has a surname that occurs only once, they would not be in this count. These were exclusively individuals that only had that surname ever one time. So also think about if you're dealing with a surname that appears to be very uncommon. It can also help you, but also has a little bit more challenge. These are not necessarily keyed perfectly. When I was finding these examples, I did find some examples where I disagreed with the keying, but generally I still think it was very good. But just think about that aspect. I think it's very helpful. Gender, this one surprised me. There were significantly more males, massive statistically. Wow, what am I trying to say? Statistically, there were a lot more males than we normally see in a big population like this. In fact, it's usually reversed, where there's about 1.5% to 2% more females than males. I haven't looked at this deeply. I'm assuming it's because there could have been a lot of foreign workers in Canada, mostly who might have mostly been men. Marital status. Again, other factors I think are at play here. The life expectancy of a man in Canada in 1931 was 60 years old, and a female or woman was 64. And so that also can have some play here into the surprisingly little fewer married than I might have expected. Some other interesting statistics. The place of birth in fields 15, 16, and 17. So the instructions told the enumerator to record the province. So we have Sask for Saskatchewan and Man for Manitoba, or the name of the country. So we have Poland, Romania here. Again, another example of normalization that we conducted or did conduct. And then I'm also going to show you a chart for the father, and it was almost identical for the mother. So for brevity, I didn't do that. But so in the next two charts, just keep in mind that there's a little bit of redundancy here in that when we have a sort of a head of a household, such as a father and mother, then their relationship, so the father's nationality or where their father was born is going to repeated in field 16 for the son and the daughter, and the same thing for the mother. So keep in mind that these aren't, it's not a perfect statistical summary that I'm about to show you, but with some effort, I think we could pull them apart. So here are the top birthplaces. What I found interesting here is outside of Ontario and Quebec, more people claimed England as their place of birth than any other place, including other Canadian provinces such as Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, or Manitoba. If we look at the father's birthplaces, again, kind of a one generation earlier, but with that caveat that I mentioned, we see Ontario creeping up on Quebec as the more dominant population place, but England and Scotland here just having huge representation, right? Together, they would have passed even Ontario for where the birthplace of those parents were. So near the end here, I just want to talk about some additional search strategies. So here's an example record that I found of a Charles Torkildsen. This is a fairly uncommon Norwegian name, and it's kind of fun to do some work with because of that. But one thing that I want to point out is whenever I see a name like this and I want to try to jump back to Europe, I need to think about what was the name that this man or woman was likely using in the country where they were born. So Charles doesn't look like a Norwegian given name to me. So a little tip and trick I want to give you is I ran into this book at university many years ago called The Foreign Versions of English Names that I think you'll find helpful. I've found it extremely helpful. It's available online at HathiTrust. And this is one of the resources that I'll keep on the screen towards the end of the talk here in just a few minutes. But what this book does is for common given names here on the left for English, it will show me versions of that name in these other languages. So for example, for Charles, it's telling me I need to be thinking about the name Carl or Kale even. And here's a blow up of those two images. Charles in, I think SC here, I think they mean Scandinavia in general, and then Swedish, perhaps CALLE. Another really important strategy is look at the other information that we get about this Charles Torkildsen. We get not only that he was born in Norway and his age of 44, giving us an estimated birth year of 1887, but also his marital status. One thing that's interesting to me to look at a record like this is, did he immigrate with his wife, or did he more likely find a wife here in North America? And if we see on line 44, we have a Laura Torkildsen, who was born in Ontario, as were both of her parents. So it'd be really unlikely that she and he were married before the immigration. In fact, he immigrated in 1904, and he would have been very young, I think 17, if I remember my math. And then he was naturalized in 1919. So this immediately should start causing things to turn in our head, such as what other strategies come to mind about how we can find more information about this Charles, and I'm going to submit Carl Torkildsen, perhaps back in Norway, and how can we find more information about him? Using the information that we can find just on this page, we can now go to the 1921 Canada Census, the 1911. Maybe this family, here they're in Ontario, but maybe they were in Manitoba, and we need to look at one of these prairie province censuses. The census of 1926, we're waiting on Library and Archives Canada to give us some content on this, and this will be coming to MyHeritage hopefully before the end of the year. All the others here in blue I've highlighted. Perhaps this family went to the United States for a few years or to work for a year or two. We have excellent records for Norway, including Norway immigration registers. We have censuses that I should be able to find this individual in. This is actually a really interesting test case or sample case study. Let's call it a case study that I didn't get enough time to fully flesh out. But perhaps in another talk, I would show how, using what I know from the census, I was able to find this individual in the Norway immigration registers, leaving Norway as a 17-year-old, headed to New York. And then I was able to find his arrival passenger record coming into New York and an indication of who he's coming to stay with. And then he's showing up in Canada. I have kind of a gap in my knowledge between that arrival record in late 1903, arriving mid-December 1903, and then his stated immigration year on the census of 1904. Many other record collections we could start to think about. We get a clue that this individual went through a naturalization process. There are naturalization records available that I could also look into for Canada. There are border crossings, both to Canada and people coming from Canada to the United States. Might I be able to find them somewhere like that? So perhaps another time we'll dive more into this example. But in conclusion, let's do this again in 10 years. When they released the 1941 Canada Census, they did conduct the 1941 Canada Census very shortly after Canada officially joined World War II. So a huge credit to the Canadian government for pressing forward with their plans, and I'm sure they had been preparing for it for a long time to complete the 1941 census. We see that census not being conducted in England, for example. They just obviously were involved in many other things with the war effort. I pulled this book off of my shelf to see what did they have to say about Canadian censuses. This book was written in 1989, and they have barely 2.5 pages. And it reminded me again that the Canadian censuses that we have really only come online in the last 20 years. I remember in my earlier career at Ancestry, doing some of the very early work on some of the Canadian censuses. And it's just a reminder to me that 20 years in what we do is not that long, and these resources are tremendously helpful for the work we do as genealogists and family historians. And finally, the release of the 1931 Canada Census is the next step in the publication of these incredible records. Here are the resources that I mentioned along the way. Of course, the Canada Census on MyHeritage, the federal electoral district maps, which I didn't get time to show you, but they're very similar, almost identical to the resource you'll find at Library and Archives Canada. This wonderful little booklet, the foreign versions, variations, and diminutives of English surnames. I've found this tremendously helpful as I've been trying to figure out names, especially of many of my Scandinavian ancestors, as I'm trying to find their records back in Scandinavia. And then finally, if you really want to go deep on published statistics that were published decades ago, the 7th Census of Canada, 1931, here at this URL at the very bottom, this links you to sort of an official government publication website and very large multi-volume PDFs you can download and find all sorts of published statistics. And so with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you for your time. Again, my name is Mike Mansfield. Here's my email address at MyHeritage. If you have a question, maybe you don't have time or want to ask it publicly, I'm always happy to receive emails separately. And it was lovely diving into the 1931 Canada census with you. I will just go back to this slide and leave it here for a few more moments and then turn it back to Jeff. Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. That really was a dive. And I was thinking how fun it is to be able to open the hood and see it from the perspective of the person who's in charge of bringing this to MyHeritage. Yeah, that was a really fun tour. So thanks, Mike. And I think I've put most of those URLs in your chat area, so you should have those by now. We're gonna do a door prize here in just a second. I'll leave your screen up just for a little bit longer, and so let's ask a question of Linda before I head over to my screen. Linda's wondering, what are Canada's rules regarding when censuses are released? The U.S. is 72 years. What's it in Canada?
Yeah, it's 92. Let me just double check the math really quick. Yeah, 92 years. So that's why it was June 1st, 2023. That was exactly 92 years to the day that the census was officially conducted.
Yep, that's it. Very good.
Tomorrow. With that, I would say there's some weird exceptions when you get to Newfoundland.
Oh, really?
in this other talk, we would talk about there's actually Newfoundland censuses that are available, I think, into the 40s already. Huh. I'm not sure legally exactly why, but that might have been their late admission to the Dominion.
Okay. So Tamara says, thanks to the MyHeritage Index for the census, I found my very newly immigrated great-grandparents. They landed in Quebec in 1931 and were in Vancouver on Census Day. So congrats to you, Tamara. Thanks for sharing that.
Wow. So they arrived in the spring and made it all the way to Vancouver by the 1st of June.
That's quick.
That's incredible.
Nice job. Hey, here's an interesting one from John, because I know the answer to this and I did it. John says, is there some way of correcting a wrong spelling of a surname that probably the index was keyed incorrectly? Is that possible to do, Mike?
Absolutely, and that's a great question. And I don't know if I'm still showing.
Yeah, you are.
So yeah, if you come to a name or a record, you can down here, spotted an error, suggest an alternative. And so right here, I'm giving us, so this record is actually about a whole household. So the first thing I'm given here is a chance to pick who I want to submit a correction for. And here I could say, this was Ugelman or something. And I would be able to submit this as a transcription error or other, and then that would get included in our index for you eventually to come back and search, or your family or anyone would be able to reap that benefit. Yeah. So the answer is yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. And Mike, if I remember correctly, so I did that for my wife's grandmother just a couple of days ago. And after I hit the submit button, a message came up that said, thank you. This will be, my corrected name will be searchable within the next day. I was quite surprised that it would be there that quickly, but that was neat to see. So thanks for asking that question, John. So now that you've got those tiny URLs written down, let me switch this over to my screen and let's do a door prize. First, I'll remind you, you'll be able to go back and watch this again. It'll be up at our webinar website and free. And with a webinar membership, then you got lots of other bonus goodies, including syllabus materials. There's 7,500 plus. I think there's 7,700 plus pages. No, there's 7,800 plus pages up there now. And you can gain access to all 2,000 plus classes with this coupon code, and you can do it for 20% off. So if you've enjoyed the Webtember event today in the last couple of weeks, then please consider joining. I've put that link in your chat area. And this, wow, Mike, I think this today is number 300 of MyHeritage specific classes. And it was Mike Mansfield's class 7 years ago, I think, that really got me interested in MyHeritage. Mike, it was a class about the 7 technologies, something like that, and I just started to fall in love with it. So go up here and browse the various topics. And if you're a webinar member, you can click the bookmark icon here to add it to your watch list. And we've got a nice collection of Canada. And maybe you don't know, but we have the O Canada webinar series, which happens every other month. And I put this link in your chat as well if you want to. If you enjoyed learning from Mike, then you can go and learn more from him here. All right, our door prize for this hour, we've got a DNA test kit from MyHeritage. So let's go find our winner of this. And it looks like our winner, PJ Peterson. Congrats to you. Just watch for an email from me. All right, got that written down. There's your coupon code again, Webtember23. And then let's go to Mike for a few questions. Tim was wondering, was there any record loss in this 1931 census, or is everything available? Or do you know?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I have read quite a bit of the materials about the census. I do know that they talked about how they used airplanes for the first time to help gather materials. Generally, I'm not aware of any record loss. Some of the earlier Canadian census, I think specifically, for example, 1851 has a very significant section that was lost. It wouldn't surprise me if there's some pages here and there, perhaps, but I haven't heard or read any of any significant loss here in.
Well, that's good. Have you heard anything? This is a follow-up from Linda. Have you heard anything about maybe how many people may have been missed in the 1931 census? They weren't home or something like that. Any stats there?
That's a great question. And it's really, what am I trying to say? The odds of any government activity trying to collect information about everyone on a certain day or even in a certain week is going to be very challenging. I know in the 1950 census in the United States, they went to extraordinary efforts to find people at hotels and trailer parks. They reminded people, please include the name of the newly born baby, because they had statistics that shown they were likely being missed. Not everyone will be in the census. I think that's true. I think it's always true.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good answer.
Oh, I think it's great. I think it's wonderful. Marianne is wondering, is the census available at the Library of Congress? I think perhaps she means Library and Archives Canada.
Archives Canada. So Library and Archives Canada, I think they have the images. So we're an official partner with them, and that's how we were able to do this. Starting on June 1st. I know that they're doing some work, I think, with some of the other organizations in our domain, specifically Family Search and Ancestry. And as I looked earlier this week, they hadn't published the index that I think they're planning to get from that other partnership.
Okay. Thank you. Here's some insight from Tamara. She says, I asked Library Archives Canada about travelers because of the before mentioned ancestors and those who were on trains, boats, hotels, etc. Their response was they were not counted. So interesting insight there. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a technical term in the census literature. I almost built a slide on it where they use what's called the de jure system. It's kind of a philosophy within census where you enumerate people where you find them, not necessarily where they're from.
Yeah, okay.
And yeah, you can imagine that someone on a train or in a hotel or a motel could easily have been missed.
Yeah.
Like I said, 1950 in the U.S., they did extraordinary efforts to try to pick up those people that I believe they had evidence, 20 years later in the U.S. than this 1931 Canada, that they were missing these people that were kind of in motion, so to speak. So
okay. All right. Joni, I'm going to respond. Well, Johnny says, I thought Canada became an independent nation in 1867. If that's true, then how did an 1851 census come to be?
Yeah, so there's an 1851 and 1861. There's a number of smaller censuses even prior to 1851, where the Dominion of Canada, under its government, they're still kind of under the British Crown. They were still conducting censuses. Yeah, the 1861 is an excellent census. 1851's good, but I think about a third of it was lost. And there's some other earlier ones, well, especially for Ontario and Quebec, pieces of Ontario and Quebec. Many others, that smaller pieces that also exist. The earliest one was, I think, 25 people in and around what eventually became Quebec City in 1611.
Oh, wow.
Is the first known sort of census in Canada.
Wow. Okay. Well, Lana writes in saying, wow, I thought I was done with the 1931 census because I found my ancestors, but after hearing Mike, I need to look again. So, Lana, I'm glad that you were here today. Hope all of you learned something and are excited to head up to MyHeritage to search the census. Mike, before we head out, any final thoughts?
No, thank you. It's been my pleasure. Wish you nothing but the best in your work and research, and wish you all the best.
Okay, very good. Great way to end Webtember week number 3. We'll see all of you. Well, we've got Webtember week number 4 in a week from today, but we've also got a couple of other webinars between now and then. So check out our website and hope to see you there. And remember, life is short. Do genealogy first. Thanks. Bye, everyone. Thanks, Mike.
Goodbye.
Bye.